Okay, right. Looks like we're good. We have various people now joined. So what we're going to do is we're going to kick off with the webinar. So this webinar is using technology for effective remote working. It's obviously quite an important topic at the moment. So this webinar is on the 2nd of June. So we're just starting to lift lockdown a little bit because of COVID-19. So for a lot of organizations, they've been scrambling and trying to make sure that they can allow their teams and staff to work remotely. So this might be of, I guess, extra use to people as they start planning for the future to make sure that if something like this happens again, that actually people can work better remotely. Although I suspect that actually people will change a little bit in how they think about remote working, and actually it will be included a lot more in terms of offering it to staff. Certainly it's quite a good way of attracting staff from anywhere and actually incentivize them to join your company. So what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk a little bit around the types of technology, what you should be thinking about as an organization. We're going to talk a little bit about the risks and how you need to think about stuff differently, a bit around the techniques and processes. Obviously, if you roll out remote working, you need to be thinking about the policies and security to make sure that when people are doing stuff, your company data is safe. So I should say this is very much aimed at businesses. This isn't aimed at consumers. We're going to talk a little bit about what remote desktop and Windows virtual desktop is, and around other sort of cloud services and how they all sort of fit into the mix. So why are we talking about this? So I've been doing technology in business for nearly 18 years now, and actually things have changed a fair bit, and what you can do now is very different than what you could do in sort of 2002. So there's businesses that haven't really sort of, I guess, caught up with it. So it's important to kind of, I guess, help them to figure out what is possible. I'm also joined by Natalie, who's our head of growth. So Natalie is keeping an eye on the chat windows, any questions that people have. More than happy for you to submit any questions as we go along, specifically around sort of how it might be relevant for your business or in your situation, what you might want to do. And I'll try and answer any questions that I can. Obviously, bear in mind that it might be that I need to go away and sort of find out more specifics from you, but I can certainly talk about sort of generalities if we need to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about remote working and a little bit around, I guess, what's happened. So broadly, there's kind of 3 eras of technology that I'm going to sort of cover. Sometimes we sort of go back further and we talk about, the different revolutions from, the farming revolution, industrial revolution. So specifically when we're in sort of the technology sort of way of thinking about it, the first real computers and technology that you'd have inside a business was very much around the mainframe. There's a famous quote, which I probably get wrong, but someone from IBM said that he doesn't see there being more than 5 computers in the whole of the UK, which actually, when you think about it, is somewhat ridiculous now. But actually, when you then think about it in terms of the cloud, that kind of may end up ringing true in some ways, in that we have a couple of major cloud providers. And if you were to assume that what they do is sort of more like a computer, then actually maybe that's relevant. So I would also add so we're a Microsoft Gold partner. As I said, we've been doing this for nearly 18 years. So I'm mostly going to give examples from the Microsoft world. There are others sort of systems available, and the best BBC style. So I will pick out some of them as we go along. You'll see a couple of my slides. I've got some examples of other technologies, but very much from a business perspective, if we go back sort of 20 years, nearly everything was Microsoft. And so that's a pretty good place to start, because a lot of people, in terms of what they've got at the moment, is Microsoft. So thinking about how you transition from the Microsoft world into a more modern remote working world, whether it's Microsoft or not, is useful to start at that point. So technology changes reasonably rapidly. So what I'm saying now may be different in 3 to 5 years' time. I've definitely caught myself in the past sort of saying, oh, you probably want to do this now. because people didn't do that anymore. And actually, the reality then dawned on me that 9 months ago, that was best practice. So things do change fast. I think we're broadly getting to a stability in what the expectations are. There's a lot of things that have transitioned to, more remote working and how that works. So this should hold for a reasonably decent amount of time, but obviously, if it has changed, then we can sort of help you with that. Also, so depending on sort of your company size and how old it is, will probably also dictate the best way of you working remotely. So if you, as you'll see a bit later, if you made a big investment in lots of equipment sort of 5-10 years ago, then you're probably in a certain place. Whereas if you're a startup, then you're probably coming in from a different angle, and we can cover that a little bit as well. And I'm going to talk about the 3 sort of main approaches for working remotely in technology. And then you can sort of figure out how that might work. One of the things that we're going to offer is a free 30-minute tech consult with me or one of the technical team. So that could be our CTO, Brian, as well. But it's sort of to talk about your specific situation and what you might be wanting to think about. And that's completely free. And it just gives you an idea about what you might want to be considering as you move forward as an organization. So the first bit to caveat is remote working doesn't work if you have poor internet. And that doesn't really matter where you are, but you need great internet at both ends, whether that's at the cloud or the data center or your office or wherever that happens to be, or whether we're talking about your home, a cafe, a co-working space, or even if you're lucky enough to have a beach house, internet is massively important for remote working. If that doesn't work, remote working doesn't work. So that's, I guess, like a fundamental part that everyone needs to understand and solve. We do have some quite good solutions now. 4G, by and large, for most people, is pretty sort of pervasive. It's where most people are, and actually we've got 5G around the corner. I would say really that 4G is the key one that you need. And actually now you can get rather large contracts for not much money in terms of from the various providers. So at this time, you can, for about £20, get 100 gig on your phone, and you can tether with your computer or your tablet or whatever. And so that's reasonable in terms of getting you sort of up and running for a decent amount of time. We quite often have to help customers with getting a few 4G routers hooked up to like an office router while they, as they move office, because their internet connection hasn't necessarily gone live because they're going for a high-speed connection, which can normally take 30 to 90 days to get put in place. And if they haven't necessarily thought about it or they're moving quickly, then 4G works as an admirable sort of interim measure. So that's internet. So what I'm going to talk about now are the 3 key remote working technologies that people would consider. So this, so VPN, virtual private network, is it's the old school way of connecting back into your office. So what would normally happen, people would set up servers in their office. They'd have a mail server, they'd have a file server. They'd probably have something which we would call a line of business application. So for some, that might be Sage, that might be all they need, or QuickBooks. Some, it could be a recruitment or candidate management system. It could be an inventory management system. It could be a case management system, but it's an application which is very specific to their line of business. And what normally would happen is you'd have an IT company or like someone on staff or your favorite IT person that pops in once a month, and they would set up a whole environment internally, and everyone would be working in the office. And then someone would say, oh, okay, but we want to work remotely. And the way of solving that sort of traditionally is to put in a virtual private network. So what that is you install a little bit of software on your device, or you set it up on your tablet. And what it does is it connects you back into your office environment so that you have access to all of the items in there. And it normally does that in a reasonably quick and secure way. The challenge a lot for VPN is that if you're very much an office-based company, when you then go home, staff generally forget how to use the VPN. And it's not very transparent. So it doesn't just kind of like work when you try to access resources that are normally in the office. There's a whole thing about having to like sort of set it up and sort of like connect. And actually, it's not overly sort of intuitive. There is a little bit of I guess, a change in that there's a load of people that are like subscribing to internet versions of VPN. And they're doing this specifically to hide their traffic from their ISP and from sort of providers that might want to sell advertising based on their browsing habits. So in some ways, sort of I guess the consumerization of VPNs has become easier to use, but those systems don't really give you access back into your office environment and access your stuff. So over time, various technology companies have tried to fix this. So Microsoft have tried to come up with better versions that are transparent. The challenge is that it's kind of difficult to keep these really secure and reliable without a really big IT department. So there's some really nice technologies such as direct access, but actually certainly for the market that we normally support, actually VPNs are not very scalable. And actually normally VPNs are based on almost on the firewall that you have that goes into your internet connection. And normally they're sized for a particular bit. So a load of organizations at the beginning of the COVID and the lockdown realized that the VPN appliance they had, or their router, couldn't support enough sessions for looking after all of their staff. So all of a sudden had to go and replace some devices to then help them with doing that. Okay,
so we do have a question about actually the fact that a lot of businesses, when COVID and lockdown happened, had to come up with a way to enable remote working, and many of them chose VPNs. Now that we've had a little bit more time to settle in to the remote working, would you say some of the other technologies we're going to talk about in a minute are likely to be a better option?
So the simple answer to that is yes, the other technologies are a better option, and that's because the way that the VPN is using older technology that's rooted in the idea that people are on a network, on a local network, a LAN, so local area network. And so there's a lot of constraints around how things interoperate with each other. The more modern systems are designed with ways for people to integrate things together. One of the holy grails of technology is enter data once, available everywhere. And so by relying on the older technologies, which you would use a VPN to connect to, you're kind of, you're driving like a 20-year-old car basically. And therefore things like GPS or self-driving are just not going to be, built in or possible. And so VPN is something that, so my personal view is I really don't like VPNs. They do serve a purpose, but they're cumbersome and they're an older technology that's not great in my view. So yeah, I think people should be looking more towards newer technologies going forward. Okay, hopefully that answered the question. You think that's a good answer, Natalie?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we were hoping for. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so I've been in technology for a long time, and so I can tend to sort of go off on a little bit. So Natalie, you might have to keep me in check if I do go off on a subject a little bit. So the next technology, and so I did a little diagram. Apologies for my sort of amazing artwork. So the next technology that people commonly would use for remote working is what's called remote desktop. And this kind of grew up again from the fact that people had a lot of equipment in their office and they wanted access to all the corporate resources. So what they came up with was you would set up some really big remote desktop session hosts in what's called a farm. So you would have 3 or 4 servers, which would then look after, say, 100 people. And then that would link into your application servers and your file servers and your email servers and whatever. And what this was really doing was sending the picture of what was going on that server, so just the screen, across the internet. So the example I would sort of suggest is imagine trying to send like a picture you're taking on your phone and sending that, I don't know, 30 to 50 times a second down an internet connection. So for a lot of offices, the internet is what's known as asymmetric. So what that means is the download speed sort of from the internet into the office is say 10, 20, 30, 40, but the upload speed could be 1, 2, 3, or 4. And so when we're sort of serving stuff from our offices, we're using our upload speed as when we're sat in the office to then get it. So we're relying on people getting that stuff from the 1, 2, 3, or 4 meg sort of available bandwidth. And actually it works for a small number of people, but it doesn't scale very well. That's actually one of the other big real drawbacks of VPN, is that it's really relying on your upload speed of your internet connection. And that's a bit of a challenge, because for most companies, certainly until very recently, that's been asymmetric and poor. With things like City Fibre and sort of fibre to the premises that BT have sort of released, actually getting an affordable internet connection at sort of 100, 200 or gigabit speeds is now much more achievable. So for City Fibre, for example, you can get a gigabit internet connection for £325 a month, which all of a sudden makes all these things much more achievable, rather than the days when you would be paying, you know, £1,000 a month for a 50 meg connection. So remote working obviously is massively enabled by the technology that underpins it. So with remote desktop, you're sending a picture of what's going on the remote desktop servers. And so that means you can run, say, Windows on your Apple tablet, or you could be running it on your TV, or you could be running it on a dumb terminal or a thin client. So in reality, the remote desktop is somewhat of a reimagining of the old mainframe idea. But instead of having the wires that go to the dumb terminals inside a big sort of corporate of the past, we're really using the internet as that wire, and that's what sort of drives it. And so it's remote desktop's good because it means that you can deliver the corporate environment. You don't have to have anything on anyone's laptops or tablets. It's kind of the remote desktop connection software works on every device. So it's really, usable by anyone wherever they are. And the other thing is that none of the data ever leaves the data center, because you're only sending a picture of what's going on. The only real way of getting data out, if you're running an environment where you don't allow USB and things like that, is they'd have to take a picture with their phone. So actually from companies, organizations that really need to have a high degree of compliance, it's really great in terms of, I guess, protecting the organization and data doesn't get out, and it's really great. And actually you're controlling things like the firewalling and like your filtering. So some of the like antivirus or anti-spam, or, internet sort of filtering in terms of allowed sites. And actually you can put a lot of emphasis around security. The challenge with this system is around internet connection has to be on and live. You can't go into like an offline mode. So arguably with VPN and with the model we're going to talk about in a minute, you can go online, get your document, and then go offline and work on it, and then sort of copy the documents back. That's quite nasty because you'll end up with like clashes of documents. So if both of you or multiple people download a document and then you both edit it, then which version wins? So there's a lot of issues around that. So that's a bit of a challenge. The other sort of downside with the remote desktop is that because you may be running, 10, 15, 20 people on each server, if there's a problem, you then knock out a load of people at one go. So, there are ways of solving that, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. But ultimately, you've got shared resources, and so if you have problems with it, you then lose that unique ability to work. Especially if you're on a thin client that has to be connected, there's a bit of a limitation to that. So, like brands that you might have heard of, or names you might have heard of, would be Citrix. So Citrix was the original company that did this. So they took a Windows server, went away and came up with some clever stuff. And Microsoft went, oh, that's quite nice, isn't it? And so they did a deal with Citrix to incorporate a bit of the code back into the Windows. But then Citrix are, they're very much the enterprise players. So Citrix used to be the only game in town. Microsoft then have developed a bit, and Microsoft are great for like up to 100, 200 people. But when you go beyond that, the management, the automation, and what we call orchestration, so that's making things run automatically. Citrix are kind of the industry leader for that. So remote desktop then came along, and we do a load of remote desktop. And then the new, I guess, sort of emerging technology that does this is what's called Windows Virtual Desktop. And that runs on top of the Microsoft Azure platform. So Microsoft have created a massive cloud platform. Other people have as well. So AWS was the first. And we also have the Google platform as well. So on top of these platforms, specifically on Azure for Windows Virtual Desktop, you would have a load of infrastructure that's managed by Microsoft. So a lot of the clever security and I guess the advanced things in terms of policies and procedures. But what Windows Virtual Desktop does, it gives a nice way of giving everyone their own individual desktop in the cloud. So you get away from the shared like servers where multiple people are on, and actually everyone has their own version of Windows 10, and they can install their own software. And actually it means that you get away from a load of the, I guess, the limitations that you get with the traditional hosted desktop. So there are some other bits that you can do with these. So you can have sort of hybrid environments where you have a lot of stuff in the office, a lot of stuff on the remote desktop, either in the cloud or in the office. And so you can then use technology to sync data back between the office and with the cloud, so that actually people in the office can have local servers, people in the cloud can use, say, the Windows Virtual Desktop. And there's ways of hybridizing that. You wouldn't probably do that unless you're a company of, say, 50 people or more. But that is a way of doing it, and you get the benefits of both. So one of the key benefits of when you're locally in the office is that all your files are being loaded off of a very fast local network. So everything is really, really fast. As internet is improving, that's not so much of a problem in the cloud. And definitely the next version of remote working gets around that somewhat, because it's got a more of a synchronization type way of doing it. But as I said, there can be some challenges. So one of the other challenges with the remote desktop is because we're sending, I guess, a picture of the screen. They've done that over time. There's been lots of enhancements that mean that it's not sending a full picture every time that you take a picture of the camera, the analogy I've used. So they've managed to make it pretty efficient with the internet connections. So when you're using something like video calling, or if you're using a phone system on these, as you can imagine, you can't really be very efficient with that. You really do have to send a picture every, 30 pictures every second to get the frames per second that you would like when you're watching TV. So actually that becomes really bandwidth intensive, and it's quite difficult for them to deliver it in a nice way without investing in very, very powerful servers and under the hood in the cloud to then deliver that. So that's a bit of a struggle. So that doesn't work brilliantly. There are some workarounds, but to do those workarounds, you have to have then quite powerful devices that you're using in front of you. So, you can see that with any technology system, what you're trying to do is understand what's possible, understand what works well, what doesn't, work out what compromises work well for a particular situation, and then you work out the best solution for it. So that's why I said that we're happy to do a bit of a tech consult after, because it's not always obvious. So I just thought I'd do a little bit about who this is good for. So in our experience, recruitment love this because the barrier to entry for recruitment is kind of low, so they need to protect their data. Retail, it's great because they can just roll out thousands of devices around all their shops, and that means that they then don't have the burden of managing and updating it because they roll out the thin clients. Again, warehouses work really nicely because they're normally an environment potentially could be a lot harsher. So they want a device which has got like minimal moving parts. So most thin clients nowadays have no moving parts in them, so that actually you're not worried about things going wrong. And if there's a problem, you just ship someone a new one. They unplug 4 or 5 cables in the back, plug 4 or 5 cables back in the new one. They're up and running straight away. No real hassle. And I mean, more broadly, it's companies that need to keep data like very rigidly on their corporate systems, and they haven't got to sort of rolling out a load of the other things that we'll talk about later. So that's the sort of first two. So in the interim, since those technologies were kind of important and growing, we've had this real progression towards the cloud, and I've mentioned Azure, AWS, and Google. And so that's great because we've been able to take some of these existing servers and technologies and roll them into the cloud. And that's broadly referred to as infrastructure as a service. That's taking existing infrastructure, lifting it, dumping it in the cloud, and then delivering it from someone else's infrastructure. So that means from an IT perspective and a business perspective, you don't have to worry about kit aging. You don't have to worry about downtime of kit, providing power, thinking about backups. There's a load of headache at the basic level of infrastructure that's removed, and you can just put it on the cloud. And that's great. And there's a lot of companies that do this, and they'll still use, say, remote desktop or Windows virtual desktop, or they will even have a VPN to the cloud, because they've got applications that basically don't work in a way that will work in the more modern cloud way, and we'll talk about in a second. And they've got things like paperless or Sage 50 or 200, or they've, as I've said, they've got these old sort of custom line of business applications that just they're not really sort of cloudified in the sort of the modern thinking of how we talk about the cloud. So, I mean, commoditization, consumerization has really led the adoption of the cloud. So I guess the really core product that, so in my view, that made this transition really kick off was the iPhone. Everyone suddenly went, oh, okay, so I can really do proper work on my phone. In the past, there were people with Blackberries, but that again was very much a corporate IT system install the Blackberry stuff. Whereas Apple made it really, I guess, simple for everyone to go, oh, I have my email on my phone. I can browse the web. I can really start to do things. And then people like Dropbox came along, and Dropbox said, well, actually, have all your files on any of your devices. And people started saying, oh, okay, well, I can do this with my personal stuff. Well, why can I not do this in my business? And a lot of it really was around, I guess, the fear and the lack of control that IT departments would have. And so they, IT have resisted it for a long time. But actually, the providers have really caught up with this. And actually now, there is no real reason that most companies can't run all of their infrastructure from the cloud. There's only a very small handful of reasons. But again, there's mitigation. So for instance, one of our clients has a manufacturing line, and they don't want the manufacturing line to go down, and they need systems that control what they're doing. However, having a fast lease line, then having an ADSL backup with a 4G router mitigates pretty much every possibility for downtime for that. So there are ways of mitigating that. And so actually the cloud has really opened up this whole opportunity for people to, I guess, work remotely and actually get the capability they want. But not only that, it's opened up a huge other, I guess, realm of opportunities, because these companies then publish what's called APIs and integrations. And actually you can hook loads of stuff together to give yourself an amazing technology stack that really helps you with moving your business forward. So this is what I call, I guess, the new breed of cloud. So you've got VPN, which was the very old school. It just opened up your old existing network. You've then got you've got the remote desktop that tries to do much better with a remote offering. But in fundamentally, it's patching an old system that was, and making an old system work. Whereas this new breed, this modern cloud environment, is broadly run from browser and with a whole load of what I call sort of fat clients. So I mentioned thin clients where there's nothing on them. So you then have a full version of, say, Outlook. And then from that version of Outlook, it connects up to your Office 365 or Host Exchange if you're going back a little bit. And then it downloads a copy of, say, the last 12 months of your emails, and then that sits on your laptop. So you can still work on your email. And then as soon as you get an internet connection, you come out of a tunnel on the train, then it will then sync up and then send your emails and download your new emails. And that is, that's the kind of the way that a lot of things are going and will be. And so a lot of people say, well, where does cloud come from? And it kind of comes from where network engineers and telephone engineers would, they draw out your network diagram in your office, and they'd kind of draw a cloud and say, we don't worry about that bit, that just gets handled by someone else, and then you just get service from that. And whilst we obviously do worry about where that service comes from, a lot of the time the management of that is not really our problem. It's the big providers, it's your Googles, it's your AWS, it's your Apples, Facebook's really a cloud application. I mean, there are organizations that I know that use Facebook for providing their kind of employee engagement sort of tools. So Facebook really is a cloud application as well, certainly with the more modern Facebook workplace that they've created. So
we have a quick question.
Sorry,
James, we have a quick question. What is the small cat in a circle logo for?
Okay, I'm pretty sure I know who asked that question. So the small version of the cat is a system called GitHub.
Right.
And it's actually similar to what is the bucket symbol, the bottom left, which is Bitbucket. So these are systems that developers would use to store their code, basically, for writing applications. Although it has been adapted by other organizations to contain manuals and I guess other corporate information, because it is what's called version control. So you write a version of it, someone gets the version of that, they'll edit it, and then they'll check it back in and merge it with other versions of the documents. And it allows you to keep, track of really sensitive information. And it's really good for doing manuals or, like I say, documentation for really, really big systems where, like 20, 30, 40 people work on it. But actually from a software development perspective, it's really good for managing your code base and managing versions and making sure that you don't break any code in changes you make, and then triaging that. So that's the cat one. I did wonder, actually, I purposely dropped the names off to see which ones people might recognize, and if they did have any questions, they might ask what they were. So as I said,
there was a question on the bucket as well, but you answered that with the cat.
Okay, good. Let me just do the pointer a second on here. So this one should be pretty familiar to people, and this one very, very familiar to a lot of people. This one's Zoom. So Zoom is has grown massively. Interestingly, the Zoom results come out today, so it'll be interesting to see how much they've grown. But I suspect they've grown massively in the last in 3 months. This one's Slack. So this is very much an equivalent to the Microsoft Teams one over here. This one is Trello, which is I guess a really good distributed task management system that a lot of people use. It's very similar to systems like Microsoft Planner. And there are a lot of other sort of clones. Trello was the first one that kind of had the cloud app version. So what these really are, by and large, are cloud and browser reimagined versions of applications that we've had going back 20 years. So, for instance, Microsoft have really massively redeveloped how Outlook and Exchange works to provide a really great experience. But actually, they've also got the desktop client that means that people have got a very familiar experience using that. So there's obviously the G Suite. So you've got Google Mail, which obviously works with people's domains and whatever. And we've got a few clients that've got that, although most of our clients have got Office 365. And that's very, very browser based. So that means that everyone has to be very comfortable with browser based. So we're still in very much of transition around having like applications that sit on our computer that how we expect, but get their data from the cloud, and applications that have gone completely browser based and only work if you've got a browser. There are advancements that in modern browsers using HTML5 that means that you can still have a cache of files even when you're offline with stuff like Gmail. It's still I would say it's kind of early still, and there's still technology that's developing around sort of things that are called progressive web apps that make it better. But broadly, all these applications, certainly all the Microsoft ones all work pretty well offline. Broadly, all these applications are need good internet connection very regularly to really have the value. But actually, the capability they've got in them are massive. So for instance, I'll take Teams as an example because we know that very well. So Teams has somewhat become a hub of, so Microsoft term it as your business operating system now. So Microsoft have very much recognized that the days of them being known for Windows and whatever, those are gone. And their real marketplace is using Azure to provide all these cloud-based services for legacy stuff for wanting to put them in Windows Virtual Desktop or hosted desktop or Citrix or whatever, and for actually connecting all the other applications together. So for instance, inside Teams, you can actually have it connected up to Trello and to Google Docs, and so, or Dropbox, or to Bitbucket, or to GitHub, although Microsoft actually own GitHub now. But actually what they recognized is that the cloud is really about bringing information together. So one of the things I said early on was the holy grail for technology is enter data once, available everywhere. And that's really what this modern sort of drive for these new breed of applications is all about. It's how do we put data into systems, how do we share data, and how do we make it available to everybody? And so it provides a lot of, I guess, opportunity. And the other bit about sort of the cloud is that, so one of the things that I learned about, which for Teams, which is staggering, was that Teams added on, so I think they were running at like 30 odd million sort of users on Teams. They added on 12 million new users in the space of 3 weeks as the lockdown really bit for everybody, which is just a phenomenal ability to kind of the scale. Zoom again went from I think it was something like 10 million like meetings, to something like 200 million meetings a day are being done on Zoom. And so as an organization, you can just quickly go and get what you want, turn on features, spin things up, and actually enable your team to do a lot more without having to really think about it from a corporate IT perspective. However, by moving stuff to the cloud, that does mean we have to ask other questions. And that's where we come on to the bit around security. So how has security had to evolve for the cloud world that we now live in? So security for any organization is massively important, although it really has been brought to the fore for a lot of people with the introduction of GDPR. So BA got fined 183 million pounds, it must have been about a year ago now, a year and a half ago, for breaching GDPR. So GDPR carries massive fines. So if I remember, it's up to 10% of worldwide turnover, which is massive. So the model of how we do security has really changed. So back in the days we had servers on site and we were using VPNs, in essence, the security was all about securing the perimeter of our company network. So no one could come in without going through big firewalls and having to think about how they got, like, you would have to think about how you got people inside your corporate network. The challenge a little bit with that was, let's just say you go around a friend's house with your laptop and you get infected with a virus. You then go back home and you log onto your VPN. And what you've basically just done is you've exposed your entire company network to your laptop, which is infected. And the hole that the VPN's created into the corporate network to your laptop has then infected potentially all the other machines. And so the firewall way of doing it is very interesting, and it does have some challenges with it because it's a pretty blunt instrument in today's world. So what we do now is we've changed the security from thinking about the edge of our network to thinking about identity and compliance. So our device is compliant and is the right person trying to get access to the data and the systems that we have. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about identity. So identity is in essence really the new firewall. It is, am I who I say I am? And therefore, when I'm trying to connect to these services, am I allowed to get access to what I want? And so we have, the challenge really with identity comes back to humans. And so passwords are normally and email address are normally the main source of identity. So you put in your email address and then you then type in a password. The issue with that is people have horrible, horrible bad passwords. So they do studies every year, and one of the studies is something like 60% of people, if you offer them a chocolate bar, will give you their password. You're just like, why? Why would you do that? The other one is that people use common passwords like password or I am God or let me in, or like lots of bad ways of doing that. So one of the things that's sort of come around recently, and something that we advocate and we're really, really hot on with all our customers, and as we sort of onboard new customers, is what's called multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. So MFA or 2FA. And the idea behind that is you have something you know, which is one factor, and something you have, which is another factor. So something you know would be your passwords. That's fine. You still keep that. And the something you have would be, say, a mobile phone. And so by using that mobile phone, we can send you an SMS, which has then got a code in, like a one-use code, or a code which we can then say, actually make this computer known to us for 30 days, so don't ask me again for 30 days. Or an app, an authenticator app, which would be my favorite. So even if you have no signal, as long as you've got internet on your phone, you can still use the app. So we use the Microsoft Authenticator app. So when I log in for the first time on a new machine, or if we're using admin accounts, because we put a high level of security on an admin account, we then get a push from an app, and that then we then have to accept that to then go on. Another thing, if people are not very keen on that, is you get like a secure token, like a YubiKey. And so to then get access, you have to plug in your USB slot a key, which then acts as the something you know. So identity is massively important. So another thing we have to consider is around data protection. So if we can make sure we've got the right people getting in, we then need to think about who can access it. What happens if people leave a laptop lying around that's unattended? Do we encrypt data that's sat on the laptop so that if someone steals a laptop, we know that no one can get access to the data? So for instance, in Windows, there's a thing called BitLocker. On Macs, you have the ability to encrypt hard drives, and you know that they're not going to get into that device if they unplug the hard disk and plug it into another machine. Do we allow everyone to access from different countries? So a really simple thing to do for most UK organizations is you disallow access from, say, North Korea, Israel, from Russia, from loads of places that you know none of your stuff ever can go, and that will reduce the amount of people that can even try to log into your systems. You have to think very much about the antis, so anti-spam, anti-phishing, antivirus. How do you roll that out? How do you make sure that on all these devices? So one of the bits that I had on a very early slide was actually the world we live in now is very much a bring your own device, BYOD. So if we have a cloud, which means anyone can access it from anywhere, and actually we allow people to access from their own devices, that really changes the game in terms of people working remotely. Not many organizations want to buy all their staff phones, but actually if they can access phones on their iPhone or their Android device, but we can put policies and protections around it, then actually we're comfortable then allowing people to have it on those systems, which massively increase their productivity. But actually we know that we were protected and we're not going to end up with sort of GDPR breaches and actually sensitive corporate data getting out. So device management is massively important. Sorry, Natalie, go on.
We have a question here. So obviously this all sounds quite dramatic. Should small businesses be as concerned about data protection and security as larger businesses?
So yes, definitely. I guess the benefit from the reason we have the new breed of systems is that actually a lot of protections baked in them from default. So Office 365 by default and as part of your licensing has got the identity management, the multi-factor authentication. So in reality, there aren't really any excuses. There's not a cost excuse for going this way. So yes, we should all be doing it because everybody can be fined. And if you do have a breach, you do have to notify all of your customers and the ICO within very specific timeframes. So even if you're not doing this and you've got an old system, you still have to sort of notify them. So, I mean, the challenge a little bit with the old way of doing it is that people have quite a lot of data on whiteboards and quite a lot of data sat on servers. And actually probably the easiest way is to just to break in and steal it if someone wants your data, like physically steal it. So actually having all these policies and procedures will help you with that. So if you've got data encrypted on your servers, they're not going to get onto it. So you really do need to be thinking about these, whether you have the older way of doing it or the more modern way of doing it. So yes, it is really important in my view. So I guess the key bits around this are policies, device management, the anti system, whether you want to think about country-specific access and encryption. And then the next bit that you kind of want to think about, so using technology efficiently with remote working is, okay, so what are the principles? So a lot of the times when new technology comes along, the constraints and the bottlenecks we apply to them don't change. The example that I would use for that is signing contracts. So for a long time, you would sign a contract and you would then have to physically hand it to someone. Then faxes came along and we still physically signed them and then faxed them and whatever. And then we started then scanning them and signing them. And that's just really changing an existing process and trying to make it a little bit faster with technology. Whereas a lot of time you need to think about what can we now do differently that we couldn't before. So now you can use things like Signable or EchoSign, or there's a load of different ones. And you can now sign documents electronically and you're not doing that whole printing out, signing it, scanning it in, doing whatever. You work differently to make life better. So that's one of the things that organizations need to think about, is like, how do we use technology and the principles of working to actually generate that really good productivity in the core of what we're doing. So for instance, at the moment, organizationally, we make sure that everyone's using task planning, time tracking, everything gets sort of rolled up so that everyone can see what's going on. We have town halls where we do a video call with all the staff pretty regularly so that everyone knows what's going on. And that then means that people are on the same page, and we're using Teams to do that. We do use a bit of Zoom, because Zoom has the gallery view, which can have up to 49 people in one view. Microsoft are getting that this month, getting at least 9. Still not enough for us, so we'll still use Zoom for quite a while. So then how do we use technology to take communications to the next level? So how do people communicate regularly? So do you do an end of day roundup call? Do you do one-to-ones? Do you do organized water coolers, which are on a much more regular basis? So as an example, we do a 9:30 call across Zoom, whereby everyone talks about what their SMART goals are for the week. And then on a Friday, we have a wrap-up call at 4:30, where everyone reports on how they're getting on, and what's been achieved, and talk about what their plans might be for the next week. But then we have catch-up, sort of shorter calls. We have 2 water coolers. So we have Tuesday afternoon tea, which is I think 2:30. And then we have Thursday 11s, which both these meetings, they're half an hour. And we use breakout room functionality in Zoom. So we do 5-minute one-to-ones, as well as doing a little roundup of how everyone's getting on, and sort of have some, digital FaceTime, but we actually have FaceTime so that we're all sort of communicating well. And I guess as a little bit of an admission, I would say that because we've all been working remotely, actually I've got to know some staff much better, because we're having very dedicated one-to-one time, rather than just sat in the kitchen talking about, I don't know, the weather, or I don't know, whatever. Actually, it's brought us closer together as a company, which is great, and that's what technology should do. And so that's worked pretty well. So next thing around timekeeping is sort of, we use technology, and we have default diaries, and we try to help people understand how they're using their time. But also a lot of these things, I guess from a management perspective, are just our modes of operation now, which across the organization means that everyone trusts that everyone's doing what they need to do. So we use a lot of Microsoft To Do, we use Planner, we use the Microsoft Project Online, we use Teams very heavily, we use Clockify, we use loads of these systems that mean that we have visibility. We try, where possible, to integrate them all together. So for instance, Clockify is very easy to sort of record time from Office 365, from Freshdesk, from HubSpot, from all the different systems we're using, and it brings everything together. So that's a really important bit of how we use technology. And then we just before we kind of end, there's a few best practices. As I mentioned, we really, so as a principle for Spider Group, we are becoming a video first company. So that means every communication we have, if we can, we do it as a video call. And so there's a few different things for that. So one of my personal views is that from a marketing and an engagement perspective with people, video adoption has been massively accelerated by everyone working remotely in COVID-19. And so we want to get ahead of the curve, and we want for everything we do to be video, so that in the world that will sort of, I predict will kind of, I guess, happen over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, everything we do is very video. I would also definitely say that the one-to-ones, the water coolers and the town halls are really important. So we do a quarterly town hall. We do our bookmarking of weeks, and we do the regular water coolers. That's really good for keeping everyone in touch with what you're doing. And this isn't so much the next one isn't so much of a technology one, but technology can play a massive part. And that's understanding what your KPIs are as an organization. So key performance indicators, what things allow you to know that your business is performing at an optimal level. And if those are being sort of fed by technology so that people don't have to do it, it gives you a really easy snapshot of how your business is performing. How's the support team doing? How are our lead generation going? What's our, how much cash we got in the bank? How much profit are we making? What's our labor utilization? What's our project delivery sort of percentage? Having these KPIs available and visible for everyone to see, because you're using the right technology, gives you a massive amount of, I guess, trust in the business that it's working well. And it really means you understand, without sort of micromanaging and checking up on your team, if all your team members then know their KPIs and how they then feed in to the overall, I guess, goals and aims of the business, then everyone can feel part of the whole, and technology will really support you doing that. And that's one of the, I guess, one of the other really main best practices that I would recommend. So I guess the question that I would ask, sort of, where are you? Are you sort of legacy? Are you everything trapped in your office and you're using VPN? And I've never really met anyone that says that that's a really good environment for them to use. Are you a bit more advanced? Have you moved your email to either Office 365 or G Suite, and maybe moved some of your line of business applications to remote desktop or something like that, so that you can use technology wherever you are? I mean, the productivity gains that a lot of business owners have had by certainly sort of 4 or 5 years ago by moving their saves to the cloud has been massive. And do you have VoIP so that you can answer your phones wherever? Or have you gone fully native? Are you using Office 365? Are you using Zero for your accounts? Have you found, browser-based versions of all your line of business applications? And are you using sort of an integrated communication system like Teams phone system to really bring everything together to help make everything work well when you're working remotely? So I kind of move on to the next steps, really. So hopefully that's made sense. I can ramble on about these things quite a lot. We are offering, as I said, a 30-minute tech consultation, probably with me, but may also be Brian if we get a lot of interest with it. We also do a weekly networking event as well, which you'd be more than happy to attend. And that's spiderwhip.com/altnet, so altnet virtual networking. And are there any questions, really?
Yeah, so we've had a couple of questions. So what app do you think is best for having documents signed?
Okay, so we use a system called Signable, so Signable, and that's actually a Bristol-based business. And so I'm biased on this. So the person that set that up and founded it is a friend of mine. It's someone I've known for a long time. They've got amazing customer service. They've got APIs that you can integrate. So if you're doing a lot of documents and you've got other systems, you can integrate it in so that as part of your sales process or your employee onboarding process, you can integrate it so that the documents automatically get sent out. And then, I mean, one of the key benefits of technology is being able to workflow things. It's been able to automate things that traditionally would take human input that don't need to. And so using a system like that with APIs is very useful. They have a cloud infrastructure. Last time I spoke to them, all of theirs is running on AWS, which is the Amazon one, and it means it's very scalable, and they're doing like huge amounts of documents a month. So Signable is a good one, in my view.
Cool, thank you. And then we had another question that I'm actually going to recommend a blog post on our website, because I have a feeling the answer will take James longer than 5 minutes, which is how do you choose between AWS and Azure if you're at that stage? And we do actually have quite a comprehensive blog post talking about the differences between the two and, which is better, because the answer kind of depends on your business.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that a lot of sort of very big companies have to think about is they need to have capability in multiple cloud providers, because in the unlikely event that AWS went down, it does have problems sometimes, so does Azure, so does the Google one, you need to have resilience. And so traditionally you'd always have multiple systems in like the traditional like legacy world, and really in the modern world you need to have multiple systems. So for instance, Office 365 does do backup as part of it, but so if you delete something, that only lasts for 30 days. So if you want a better record of it, you would use something like a Mimecast, or you use a Skykick, and they would back up in different ways depending on compliance and what other stuff you want to do. So these systems are not a panacea on their own. They don't solve every problem. You do still need to think about things and figure out how to make it work for your business. And obviously that's where organisations like Spider Group help. Are there any more questions?
No, I think we covered the rest as we went through, just checking. I think all of them have been covered throughout.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Just one very final quick question that's just come in. I was recently told by an architect that images and documents are being sent by WhatsApp more than any other method at the moment. What's your opinion on that?
Okay, so WhatsApp's a really convenient method of communicating from a personal perspective. The challenge from a corporate perspective is, let's say you are having let's say your staff use WhatsApp, and something happens on WhatsApp, and someone promises something to a client, and then they leave the business, and the client's saying, you promised me you deliver that, or there's a harassment claim because of something that goes over WhatsApp. The challenge is you've got no visibility and there's no compliance around what your staff are doing with it. And that's a really challenging place to be as a business owner and someone that would manage your tech. So there are plenty of other ways of doing that with the various different systems. So I would say certain sizes of companies just go, you know what, convenience overrides, until they get burnt or until something major happens. There's so much technology available that will do that and give you those other bits that I would encourage people to look at those alternatives. So like Dropbox, or there's loads of other ones. Obviously OneDrive and Teams. There's loads of different ways of doing it. So I would say if you do that, you're taking a big risk. And whilst it may be okay in the short term, longer term, there's going to be court cases and people are going to be in a lot of hot water by using something that they can't really prove what happened.
Thank you.
That takes us up to our hour.
It does, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. And our next webinar is in 2 weeks. So hopefully we'll see you there.
Great, lovely. Thank you. Well, cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, James.